everybody, welcome. Have you ever wondered why some conflicts seem impossible to resolve no matter how hard you try? Today's guest has spent decades cracking this code, and his insights couldn't be more relevant in our increasingly profound world. Bill Eddy isn't just another conflict resolution expert, he's pioneered groundbreaking approaches, combined legal expertise, social work, psychology, and so many more topics to challenge disputes. As the co-founder of the High Conflict Institute and author of 20 books, including his recent release, Bill has transformed how we understand and manage high conflict personalities in every setting, from courtrooms to boardrooms. We're going to jump right into him soon, but first, I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authors on Mission. Stay tuned as we dive into Bill's journey from family law specialist to becoming one of the world's leading voices in conflict resolution. Without further ado, welcome, Bill. Thanks for joining our podcast.
And glad to be on. It's a great discussion.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting. And to all of our listeners right now, Bill and I were just talking about how he actually has his own podcast where he talks about bullying and conflict resolution weekly. So this is going to be a very interesting take on it as we dive more into the writing aspect of how to make these very meaningful pieces of literature. So we're very excited for that. And I guess, just branching right off that, we can jump right off into the bat. You started off with your work, many years ago. How did you decide to write your very first book? 20 books ago, all those years ago. What sparked your inspiration?
Basically, I had been a therapist, a clinical social worker, and I became a lawyer. And I like problem solving, conflict resolution, mediation, and lawyers were doing mediation. And so I decided to go into that career. Well, what happened is, as a lawyer, I started noticing that a lot of legal disputes had people with mental health problems, which I knew about as a counselor, as a therapist. And so by the year 2000, I felt like I need to start writing about this and explaining this, because I say to lawyers and judges and mediators, oh, well, these people may have personality disorders or other mental health issues. And they're like, what's that? Like in family law and family court, people talked about high conflict families that kept coming back to court, were hostile, fighting over the kids, stuff like that. And I said, well, they may have patterns of behavior that I recognize from my mental health work called personality disorders, but in family court, they thought of them as high conflict. So I started writing a book, High Conflict Personalities, to explain primarily to legal professionals. And so I started in 2000 and actually self-published it in 2003. And so it was my first kind of explanation of this crossover, focusing on high conflict personalities and what people can expect and things you can do to solve conflicts with them.
Understood, right. So I'm very interested, and maybe our listeners are too, the realm of self-publishing is something that, I've talked to many clients who have done it before. I've helped angel write their books. Well, that's what we call it with Authors on Mission, angel writing over ghostwriting. But sometimes when I'm ghostwriting for private clients, they take their book and they're self-publishing. They throw it on Amazon. I'm wondering, did you experience any sort of difficulties? Is there anything that you might give as a tip for a listener who might be interested in doing the same thing?
Well, this was 21 years ago. And so publishing wasn't quite where it is today. So you didn't go to Amazon to publish your book, but you could put your book on Amazon to sell it. And so what I did is I wrote letters to publishers, and they said, well, this sounds kind of interesting, but there's no market for your book, so we're not going to pick it up. And so I figured, okay, I got to self-publish it. A friend had self-published 1,000 copies of a hiking book. And I thought, all right, well, I'll get 1,000 copies of my book printed. And around that time, a friend of mine was taking a course where he was supposed to set up a website. And he said, I don't know what I would set up a website about. And I said, oh, well, I've got a book.
So it just so happened he wanted to set up a website, had no content for it, and you happened to have a book put on that website.
Exactly. So
Wow.
He created a website for me, and I wrote a couple articles, and I put my picture of my book cover, and I did sell it through Amazon. But I took it, this is 2003, I took a stack of them to a conference, a mediators conference in March of 2003. And by the end of that night, I had sold one book.
Okay. A lot of effort, a lot of time for one sell. I mean, all things considered, that one sell, you don't know the impact that could have made. That one person could take it and share it around, but I'm sure you were hoping for a lot more than that, right?
Absolutely. But people said be persistent. So on Amazon, I ended up over the next couple of years. So I had 1,000 copies printed. I sold about 300 on Amazon over a couple of years. And then a small press discovered my self-published. Someone knew somebody who showed it to them, and it was actually a couple who were starting a small press in the conflict resolution field. And so they said, oh, we'd like to publish your book. So in 2006, they published it with actual editing and actually art on the cover and all of that. And then it slowly grew from there. So it was a very tiny step by tiny step process.
Yeah, and you know what? I guess a lot of people kind of have to go through something similar, even in the modern days, because you might think that you could do it all by yourself, let me self-publish it. Nowadays, it is a lot easier, like I mentioned before, my clients, I've heard, just put it right on Amazon, there's no limitations it's a great way to spread your word and your message. But I do see how, in order to really make sure that it gets seen and heard and purchased, you do need a little bit of help. So that's just amazing that you actually had a lot of people come into your life and give you a little bit of a support. Sometimes it's about having just hand to guide you and help you out a little bit, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Can't do it alone. You need, first of all, people to give you encouragement, and then people that know kind of next steps. But part of it is, if you have an idea that you believe in and you think is important, start writing. That's, people often say, how do you get started? And I said, start writing grocery lists, start writing what you want to do today, start writing how you feel right now. That get started writing. And I might mention, as a good place, that I actually had a couple meetings with a writing teacher. And she said, basically, get yourself writing and don't worry about how good or bad it is. Just write and then come back to it and tighten it up. And maybe start by saying, I don't feel like writing today. I'm really not sure what I should do today. Well, I'm going to talk a little about such and such. And then you cut out all the pre-stuff and just talk about such and such. But you got yourself going. And that's the message that I got. And I think that worked because, I kind of step by little tiny step got into this because I had some ideas I wanted to tell people about.
Yeah, I mean, I like that you said that, because the funniest thing is we actually have a lot of authors come onto this podcast and they say something very similar. It seems to be almost the most profound overarching message when it comes to writing, because so many people are afraid to share their ideas. They think it's not too good, or they think they don't have time. It's all about having that encouragement, like you said. And I love the way you frame that, because that's a lot different than what we hear usually. It's not just get it out there, but you also need that encouragement, somebody to support you and be on your side with them. Your books also share this message, especially with the tender topics that you talk about. Can you talk a little bit about that? Do you talk about encouragement in your books, about how you need to help other people in a way?
Absolutely. So a lot of the content of my books is how-to content and how to get along, especially in difficult situations. So you're dealing with what we refer to mostly as a high conflict person who does a lot of blaming, all or nothing thinking, maybe unmanaged emotions and extreme behaviors. And so, we think about 10% of people are like that, and 100% of people are going to run into them. And so we look at how to, with empathy, kind of calm people down like this, how to deal with relationships, how to deal at work, how to deal at home. So a lot of it's advice, and with that we try to give encouragement and the message that you shouldn't pick on people. Our goal is to help you protect yourself from being picked on. And so we try to set limits, but not, be hostile towards people. Just calmly say, no, you can't do that, and give people encouragement to try to be assertive in their lives, to get what they want and to manage difficult situations. So encouragement's a big theme.
Yeah, and I like that you encourage them to be assertive also. I mean, that's something I struggle with a lot, someone will be like, just speak your mind, whatever throughout my life, but it takes a level of confidence and being assured of yourself in order to do that before you can assert message to others. And that kind of goes right into writing as well, right? Because, to get your ideas on paper, that's a way of asserting yourself. I actually can imagine, you probably offer tips in your books, right? I mean, it's a how-to guide, of course. So I'm almost guessing that you probably tell anybody reading to write stuff down, right? Just getting their thoughts down on paper, that helps them.
Get it going, that's the key, And I have I've got Post-it notes and outlines and this and that. And it's like, one thing I know now at this stage in my life, I might have some brilliant ideas, but I won't remember them when I sit down to write them down. So I try to write them down sooner, so keep a little Post-it sticky note pad, and I'll write 4 words down on it, and I'll come back to, oh yeah, I remember, I'd forgotten all about that idea. Mm-hmm.
That's such a good method. And what's funny is I use my phone. Sometimes, now we have like Siri, it's like, hey Siri, remind me about this, right? But the funny thing about that is sometimes it's just not reliable for me. It sometimes mishears what I have to say, and then I don't remember what I was trying to say in the first place. But I like the idea of just the good old-fashioned sticky notes. We don't get enough of that these days. There's something satisfying about taking it, peeling it off the page, like sticking it right on wherever you are, the desk or the wall next to you.
And you'll see it. You'll see it. I do notes in my phone also, but I don't look. And a sticky note's jumping out at me if I posted it somewhere in my visual, framework. So that's what I like about sticky notes. But often I'm not near a sticky note, and I'll put it in the phone. And I do sometimes go back and look, say, oh, that was an idea I got to use now.
Yeah, you kind of have to use whatever's around you, whatever it is that you don't lose what you have to say, what you want to say. That's like the worst feeling, right? Whenever you're about to say something, suddenly you're like, wait. And it's even worse when it comes to writing, because you might never get that idea back unless you have that note down. So yeah, to all of our listeners right now, another amazing tip: whatever you have an idea for, put it down on a list. Bill mentioned even making grocery lists before.
Right.
Whatever it takes, just start writing. Whatever it is. So yeah, I would like to kind of switch back gears a little bit, take a step away from writing for just a second to talk a little bit more about your experiences, because our listeners here now know that you have a great experience with writing. You've been through self-publishing and, industry publishing and 20 different books, right? Tell us a little bit more about how, you've been through many different careers in your life, right? From career spanning law, social work, even mediation. How has the role of creating positive change affected you in each of these different positions?
You mean the writing part or the other part? Because
so I meant more in generally, right? So your own, perspective of it all, but also we can touch upon the writing and how that might have changed throughout your books, because 20 books, I'm sure your perspective has altered a little bit throughout all of that. So let's start with your personal thoughts about it, and we can kind of tie in the writing aspect too.
So what's interesting, when a little bit after I got out of college, I was exposed to mediation, the idea of getting 2 people together, work out a problem, where the mediator doesn't decide for them, but helps them talk to each other, come up with solutions, helps keep them calm, and all of that. So mediation really was my first career love. There weren't a lot of jobs for mediators. We're talking back 1970s, 1980s. And so I decided to go into counseling and family counseling and resolve family disputes. So I became a clinical social worker, got a master's in social work, and practiced that for a dozen years. But there was a neighborhood mediation center got started, and I volunteered there. So in the evenings, help neighbors resolve a dispute, help police and community resolve a dispute, landlord-tenant, small business, consumer. There'd be different little issues. And usually in 2 or 3 hours, we could resolve the issue. Well, I really liked that and realized lawyers are starting to get paid to do mediation, so I'm going to go to law school. So I went to law school primarily to do mediation, but I figured I better practice law for a couple of years so I know what I'm talking about with my mediation clients. Well, because of my counseling background was so relevant, like to these high conflict family law, divorce, and custody of children disputes, I ended up doing that for 15 years.
Oh, man.
And so it was in the middle of that I started writing to explain, mostly to lawyers and judges and mediators, why the conflicts weren't getting resolved, because I thought there were these mental health problems that weren't getting addressed. So that's how I started that first book. And when this small publishing company picked it up, they told me, this is an interesting book for legal people, but you should write a general book for everybody about high conflict personalities, neighbor disputes, family disputes, and such. So in 2008, this was a lot faster. In about 6 months, I wrote a book called It's All Your Fault, because that's the theme of high conflict people. It's all your fault, and I didn't do anything wrong. It's all your fault. And so that book got some interest. My books, I would sell them at conferences for lawyers, therapists, mediators, because there's a lot of continuing education required, and they like people that have written a book. So I'd written a couple books. They said, oh, come and be our speaker. They'd introduce me and say he's written a couple of books. And so people would listen. People listen to you after you've written a book and it's published.
Oh, that's for sure. Yep.
Even if it's self-published, people listen more because it is a project. And to have the endurance to finish the project all the way through does get a lot of respect in our society. So that's part of why I say it's worth doing. Well, what happened is kind of writing the books and doing the seminars is word got around, and I ran into a woman who wrote a book called Stop Walking on Eggshells. And that book has sold like a couple million copies. And I asked her for a review of one of my books, and she said, I'll do that, but I really want you to write a book about divorce and high conflict, because a lot of people come to me to know about divorce and high conflict. So I wrote that book, and she self-published it. And so we're now into about, where are we? In about 2008, anyway, the 2000s. And a friend of hers had gotten her the contract with a literary agent for Stop Walking on Eggshells. And she said, I should talk to him about this book I wrote for her. And I called it Splitting, Protecting Yourself When Divorcing Someone with Borderline or Narcissistic Personality Disorder. And she had self-published it. So she talked to him, I talked to him, and he got us a contract with New Harbinger Press, which is a big publisher. And they publish particularly for mental health professionals and individuals for self-help. So they're very much a self-help publisher in the mental health field. And so we got a contract for that. So now I've got 3 books, one with a big publisher. And I don't know if I should say it, but the rest is history.
Yeah, and so have all of your other books been through Harbinger then ever since that 3rd book? That's correct?
No, this is very interesting. I should back up 2008 because I was speaking and teaching about high conflict stuff. A woman in Arizona, I'm in San Diego, she's in Phoenix, had me do a seminar for her judges for the family court system. She worked for the State Supreme Court of Arizona. And so I came and gave them a seminar in this managing high conflict behavior. And she said it was the best rated seminar and they were really pleased with it. And I brought my book and they bought my book. And she said, I'm actually going to night school getting an MBA. And my plan is in 6 months to stop working for the state of Arizona and set up my own seminar business. And I was thinking of getting different speakers to do seminars. But after seeing you and the impact you had on the judges, I'd like to just work with you and have the 2 of us do high conflict training around the country for family law, human resources, law enforcement professionals. So 2008, we started that. 2008, I had 2 books with this small press. We started running into some conflicts. They started looking like they might not keep the business going. So we transferred the rights for my 2 books over to High Conflict Institute, which I started, co-founded. And so most of my books have since been published by a publishing arm of High Conflict Institute, which my business partner owns and operates because I don't want to run a publishing company, but she does. So out of my 20 books, I think 16 of them were published by this institute-related small press.
Well, geez. Though, I mean, over how many years did that just span, that whole story you just told me? I mean, from...
Yeah, so if you figure I self-published in 2003, and now it's 2024.
20 years, yeah, about over
21 years of publishing progress. But I've got other, but I have other books now. 6 years ago, so the literary agent that got us the splitting book with New Harbinger, I wrote a book in 2017. He shopped it around and got a contract with Penguin Random House, which is the biggest publisher, I think, in the US. And they have like 25 little publishing houses within Penguin Random House. So I've got a book published by Tarcher Perigee. That's the house within the big house. And so
you've been all over the place, my goodness.
And that book is called 5 Types of People Who Can Ruin Your Life. And it sells about 10,000 copies a year. And it's doing really well. In my mind, that's really well. I mean,
it's
a
a big
million
step
seller.
It's a big step from that 1 copy first sold in the beginning of
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It sounds a lot better.
I mean, just anybody listening right now, you think about that. You know, he started off, did all this work, 1 copy was sold. 20 years later, we have a book over, 10,000 you said, per year.
It's about 10,000 a year. Actually,
that's crazy.
I'll squeeze in a little extra note here. So that book came out in 2018, and it did real well the first few years, and then started to drop down a little bit. And a couple months ago, someone was being interviewed by Joe Rogan, the podcast guy, and mentioned he'd come across that book and found that he liked it, that it was helpful. They talked about my book for 3 minutes on this Joe Rogan podcast. and my sales like increased like 1,000%. And then they came down a little bit, but I have a publicist who has promoted some of my books kind of on call. I go, okay, we got some business, so I'll give you some money this month. So she approached Joe Rogan and Andrew Huberman, who was the psychologist, science podcast, one of the top science podcast people in the world. And that podcast just shot sales up again. And so you never know. That book was out 6 years ago and suddenly got discovered. So it's probably going to be, it could be 15,000 or 20,000 this year.
I mean, that's crazy. That the fact that it's even growing even more now. One thing I'd like to kind of talk about here is this whole journey you've taken, from that first book to now. This whole time I'm kind of thinking to myself, okay, this guy kind of went on a quest here, right? Because you told me you initially only wanted to do mediation, and then you kind of found a very wraparound way of finding your niche in that and making it into a huge thing. And that's something all of our listeners can kind of learn from too, because you had that one dream, something you wanted, mediation, right? And I was almost laughing to myself because it almost sounds like you accidentally became a lawyer just because you wanted to do mediation. It's kind of like, oh man, I feel like it's almost like Forrest Gump. Like he had one interest, right? And then he ended up doing all the successful stuff without even realizing it. That sounds like you a little bit.
I feel like I've stumbled into this career.
Just because you had to follow the steps and you did better than you were expecting a little bit, in a way.
Yes. I didn't know, and I didn't know that people would be this interested. And at this point in time, I didn't really know I was a writer. So, I'd been working for 25 years before I wrote this first book. And I figured I want to get the message out. But I didn't think of myself as a writer. It was more like a teacher. And discovering, hey, I can write, I like to write, people like to read my stuff. And so it's been kind of a self-discovery, maybe this is what brings it all together, is writing.
Yeah, I do very much agree with that. And I absolutely love the line you said, I did not know I was the writer. I mean, that should be like a little slogan right there for the industry or for anybody, right? You don't know you're a writer. It applies to the writing field in any industry too. Like you didn't know you were a lawyer. You didn't know you were, any of these roles, these hats that you wear. But, you made it happen. So I love that.
Thanks.
And, I'd kind of like to take this now and kind of gear it back now to the writing aspect, because there are so many things that you touched upon within your story, and I kind of made notes here so I could remember it. Sort of just the way that you naturally came across different strategies to promote and make your books more than they ever were without even realizing it again. But these are tips that I share with my clients and podcast guests all the time. The idea of finding other people in your industry to help you promote your book. Like the author of Walking on Eggshells, I looked her up. Was that Randy Krager?
Yep.
Okay, yeah. So, for example, to promote your book, she wrote you a very nice recommendation. It was within the book, right? Sort of just like.
Well, I was asking her to write a recommendation for my high conflict personalities book. Yeah, and then she said, and by the way, would you write this other book for me? And that also was about 6 months because I had all this information, and she really promoted it. She was the one that made it happen, and she had the connection with the agent, and she had, her book was selling well. Her book came out in 1998, and I connected with her, I think it was 2003, and then, the rest is history or something.
You like saying that quote. I like it. The rest is history. But no, I mean, you make a great point, because that's something that a lot of authors, especially in the beginning, might not realize is that it's not just about writing. It's not just about even, having an editor or publisher. You need almost a marketing team, somebody to help you make those connections, right? I mean, you were fortunate enough to know her, and she was able to, help you promote your book in that way, and even suggest a whole new book for you. Not everybody has that, so that's what Authors on Mission does. We're able to kind of, help you promote, like make your website, everything. We've been in the industry for a while, so we're able to kind of help people, connect with similar books in the genre, right? It's just like another great way to build authority in your book, which you mentioned before is another huge thing.
So much of it's all these connections, and they don't happen unless you get something out there. Because
it all starts back to that, yeah.
I was getting review comments, and that's when I heard about Randy Krager and contacted her. If I didn't have something for her to look at, then she might not have said, well, please write this other book. But she had a book to look at, which, like I said, I didn't think I was a writer. I thought I was kind of like a teacher. And so I wrote to just tell people stuff. I didn't use flowery language, or I didn't think of myself as, someone with this, the language of a real writer. I don't think I had that, but I had kind of a conversational language that was easy to read. And so getting that out there started to get attention.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that conversational language? Because that's sort of another topic I wanted to touch upon with you, is that, like, you've written 20 books, they're all successful. There has to be something you're doing right there, within your text. And maybe it's like conversational language. I mean, nobody wants to just hear facts spit right at them one after another. Tell us a little bit more about how you're able to make that happen in your book.
Well, I think I mentioned I met with a writing teacher a couple times.
You did say that, yes. So she helped you.
And she said two things: find your voice and find your audience. And I was like, well, my audience is the world. I want everyone to read my books. And she said, yeah, but that's not how it works. And your voice, I don't know what my voice is. Well, she said, just start writing. She was really big on just get writing. And what happened is, because I'm, clinical social worker, family lawyer, media, I'm used to talking like one-to-one with people. Have a lot of conversations, like as a therapist and such. And so I started writing like I'm having a conversation with somebody, like here's something else you need to know. And if you run into this situation, this is a few tips you might consider. And so I kind of picture writing it to someone that wants this information. And I don't have to convince them this is important. They want to know what to do. So it's very much how-to self-help kind of writing. And so I would write that way, and people started saying your stuff's easy to read. I don't know where I got the idea, but somewhere I got the idea that I should write for the 8th grade level or higher. In other words, don't use a lot of big words, don't use really long sentences, so that someone in 8th grade could read my books and maybe get something out of them. Actually, I think I was probably writing more for 10th grade, but the idea to keep it whenever, like, there's a big word that says something and a smaller word that can convey the same thing, use the smaller word. And so my reading's conversational, easy, not complicated. And I get feedback often from people that my books are easy to read. Some people say, I sat down and read your book last night. It's like, oh my goodness. So, but keeping it accessible for readers, not worrying that you're not flowery or using sophisticated language. Since I'm mostly in a self-help field, easy to use language. But what's interesting is professionals, lawyers, therapists, mediators, also like my books better than the research journals. because my books are easy to read, and those, you got to work your way through them. They take longer, and they're not as friendly. So I think what's happened is I found my voice in writing in this kind of like I'm talking to you style, kind of, here's some tips you might find helpful, that kind of style.
Absolutely. And that's another tip that I always give my clients. It's great that we're on the same page here because, if you're just writing academically using jargon from your field that not only is someone going to want to sit down and read it after a long day of work, right? But then it's also specialized to that niche of people who know those words. But what you did by making it accessible to the 8th grade language, right? It kind of opened up to the general audience, and that therefore allowed more and more people to pick it up and, like you said, read it in one night. That's incredible. Those are pretty long books too, right? They're not even.
Well, my books vary. So
okay.
The big books, like the Splitting, the divorce book, is somewhere around 300 pages. It's All Your Fault, I think 350 pages. High Conflict People, that book became High Conflict People in Legal Disputes when that publisher did it. And that's around 300. So these books are around 300. Let's see, the 5 Types of People book, I think most of them are around, 250 to 300, but then I wrote some shorter books on specific methods. Like we have a method called BIFF, B-I-F-F, brief, informative, friendly, and firm, and it's for writing emails when you're responding to a hostile person. So someone says you're a jerk, you're stupid, you don't know what you're doing, and by the way, what time is the party begin? And so the BIFF response would be, thanks for letting me know your concerns. The party begins at 6. And you just skip all the arguments and all the defenses and all that stuff. So those are little books. Those are like 200 or less pages.
Right, and I can see why, because, it's a very simple, straightforward idea and tip for a very, specific type of problem too. But I'm sure a lot of us can relate to that, especially nowadays when everybody's working online and virtually. Like you're reading a message and you're like, okay, how dare you say that? But then just be professional, move on, whatever. Respond to what has to be said. And that's how it goes. As an editor and writer, and as a writer yourself, I'm sure you receive a lot of messages sometimes that are just like, did you really just say that? Either whether from your editors or from your readers or even just fans. It's a good tip that resonates with lots of people. So again, very approachable in many different aspects. I think that's one thing that's wonderful about what you're doing.
I should mention that 4 of the 20 books are BIFF books. So we have BIFF, Quick Responses to High Conflict People. Then we did BIFF for co-parent communication for people after divorce, because that's a lot of what I work with. Then we have BIFF at Work, because Megan, my business partner, focuses more on workplace conflict. And then we have BIFF for lawyers, because lawyers work all the time by writing, and they have clients, they have other lawyers, and lawyers can be pretty nasty sometimes to each other. And so we have a lot of tips in there how they could talk a little better. You get an email like this is a BIFF response. We suggest that's what you do.
I like that. It's important to just have tips like that in many different realms too. And the way that you didn't put it into one big book on BIFF, right? You made it specialized, and that's people. It's more likely that people pick up something small, for their specific problem, not flip through the whole thing to find the ones for co-parenting. So that's another great strategy that all of our listeners can hear on too, could listen to as well. Those are some great tips for sure. Now, let me see here. What else do I want to cover today with you? Oh my God, I feel like we've talked about so many amazing things, and I want to make sure we cover everything today. Could you share a memorable case or situation where your method of high conflict personalities led to some amazing breakthrough? Something like, perhaps you might have mentioned it in one of your books, like a great example of something that has really resonated with either your readers or one of your clients?
So, well, here's one of my favorite stories. So, remember the book I mentioned, It's All Your Fault, that I had come out in 2008. And so, a year or two later, I started doing consultation, and I do a lot of consultation now, 6, 8, 10, 1 hour or 30-minute on high conflict stuff. So a woman contacts me. She says, in my office, I just got a new supervisor. The old one left, maybe retired, something like that. And this new supervisor is just terrible. And she's picking on me. I'm like her favorite target. And she said, what do? I come into my office and I kind of run past her office so she doesn't see me, and I hide in my office and close the door. And what I said is, well, our method is, we call it the CARS method: connecting, analyzing options, responding to misinformation, and setting limits. So CARS, CARS method of conflict resolution. So I said, here's some tips with this. First of all, try to connect with her. Instead of avoiding her, try to connect with her and just say something like, hey, that presentation on Friday was great, thanks a lot. Say something that shows empathy, attention, and respect, because that's another one of our techniques. And we have a little book on that, Calming Upset People with EAR. But before that came out, It's All Your Fault had this in there, had the CARS method in it. And so I said, try to connect with her in a positive way. Each day, find something to say that's respectful or shows empathy, or just kind of have eye contact with her for a minute. But also look at how you can set limits, maybe protect yourself a little bit. And she actually worked where there was a union, and she talked to her union rep, who suggested that they have a meeting to kind of go over how things can go more smoothly. So she had a meeting with the supervisor, the union rep, and herself to talk about how can we make things go more smoothly here. But that came a couple weeks after she started doing these EAR statements: empathy, attention, and respect. About a month later, she calls me up and she says, Bill, it worked. I'm now her favorite.
Really? I feel like that was it could have gone so many different ways, especially after contacting like HR about it, right? Or sorry, the union.
Right.
But yeah.
Sometimes you have to put little extra leverage so they know that you're not isolated. And that was important. But what's ironic is she said, but now she's picking on this other guy. And so, Bill, what I did is I gave him your book.
Stop, really? Not even just like, here, this is what I know. Just read this guy's whole book. I'm not even going to tell you. I'll let him tell you. That's great. Wow. I mean, branching off of that, it's pretty clear then that by having these books out there, it kind of helps you grow your mediation business by having these books out, not just, in terms of credibility, but outreach. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
The books produce clients for me. The books produce speaking engagements. People say, we saw your book, we need a speaker. We've got our state conference for lawyers is coming up. You wrote this book, High Conflict People and Legal Disputes. So you're an author. Plus, because I also speak in Canada, I'm an international author, an international speaker. And so that kind of adds some more interest. So it all kind of circles around. What's interesting is, and I don't know, this may be bad news for your audience, is the books don't make a lot of money for me, but they make contacts for speaking and consultation, which does pay pretty well. Because if I'm speaking to 100 lawyers, they're going to pay me for that. Probably in a day what I would get paid at the end of the year for a book. So it's interesting, if you have a field you're into, that the book can actually be kind of an advertising for the work you do, whether it's gardening, whether it's setting up, websites or whatever it is. Writing a book shouldn't be the way you're going to retire and that's the end of the line. It's writing a book feeds the other work that you do. And I like writing alone, but I also like talking to people. And so I like the balance of books and the kind of work I do.
I mean, you're taking the words right out of my mouth, Bill. Too, this whole podcast. The book is amazing, and you want that to get on the shelves. But the likelihood of it really just, generating enough revenue to support you the rest of your life just on itself isn't quite likely unless you're J.K. Rowling, right? But, if you've established your book in a way that you can kind of pull additional content off of it for years to come, then that's what helps you. I mean, and going back to what you said about whatever industry you're in, somebody could write a book about. I have so many clients who do the same thing. I mean, I would have never guessed that somebody would come to me who is a dog breeder, wanting a book about dog breeding so that she can kind of, talk about her business, right?
Yeah.
I have somebody a realtor came to me recently, even somebody who helps with hoarders, right? It helps cleaning out the houses of people who are way too cluttered, right? Those kinds of things, very niche, unique topics. They come to you, you never know, you help them write their books, and that's what we do at Authors on Mission, because we're able to take your ideas and put it in a way that every chapter, every paragraph can be used for another type of media. For example, chapter 1, you can do a whole speaking engagement about that. Or this certain paragraph you can make a Twitter post about, or a YouTube video. Just thinking of ways that you can expand upon that and then allow all the other medias to bring back to your book and continue to promote it. Alternatively, exactly what you did, it also just drives business to you, and people want your advice to resolve their conflicts, whatever it is. And another thing that's incredible is that you mentioned too, and you took the words right out of my mouth when you said it, is that whatever industry you're in, writing a book can help. Even the silliest and most random seeming topics. I had someone come to me with, he's a hoarding expert, so he helps people to declutter their homes and to support them through those hard times. And it's a really powerful thing that I would have never thought about, but by writing his book, he can promote his business and also help, with mental health and self-care. Same thing with, I had somebody come to me who, she's a dog breeder, and same deal. She wanted to, promote her business of dog breeding, and somebody else came to me who was a realtor, same thing. So whatever it is, whatever your topic is, getting a book out there can support you in so many ways. So our listeners understood, how important it is and how you are a prime example of how that helps us.
Yeah, by accident.
Yeah, exactly. You Forrest Gumped your way to the top just by wanting to follow your instincts and become a mediator. I love that. Before we wrap up today, I just want to ask also, first off, do you happen to have a copy that you might want to show to our listeners and viewers? Any of them, anything in your vicinity that you might want to show and promote to our viewers right now. Sometimes we love to hear about a book, but seeing the cover is all different. All right, well, check it out, everybody. We got a little fish there, and he is... What is in his mouth?
There's a bully fish about to eat the little fish, and all the other little fish get together and scare the bully off. And the little fish gets away. So it's our new world of adult bullies, how to spot them, how to stop them, and that's the newest book. So this just came out in June 2024. And this amazing, because there's so many similar patterns of bullies in families and neighborhoods, at the workplace, and in the world. We've got countries bullying other countries, things like that. So I kind of explain what the patterns are, and you made a good point about using different chapters, because I've been interviewed a lot for that book in the last 6 months, and people have different, tell me about in the workplace, how do you spot them, what do you do? Or what about in families? You've got someone who's maybe engaged in domestic violence or something like that. How do you help them? Or what if your neighbor is a bully? And so different parts people want to focus on that relate to them. But this particular book ties together bullies everywhere and that they have the same pattern pretty much everywhere. So it's a very broad book, and I wanted to see how many pages it was. This is 278 pages, so it's not a bad size. It's something you could read in a long evening if you wanted to.
Perfect. And that's your most recent book, you said, right? This past summer it came out?
Yeah, and it's got about 60 examples in all different settings. And I put a list in the back of the book of the type, workplace example, school education example, family example, things like that. So I like to make them practical, easy to use, easy to find what you're looking for in the book that way.
Yeah, I love how you do that, because that's what our readers would need, right? They want to find exactly what meshes to them and what, is going to help their situation. So organizing it in that way, making it general enough that a lot of the advice does apply. I love that. So all of our listeners, check out the book. He just held up. The cover has a picture of a little fish with a fork in his mouth. He's running away from all of the other fish. It's on Amazon, I'm sure, right? They can find it.
Oh yeah, it's everywhere. It's an ebook and it's also an audiobook.
Great. So we'll include links to it online, and when we post this podcast, and we'll be able to promote that. So everyone, check it out. If you know anything by the end of this podcast here, Bill here knows all there is about the world of consulting, and he knows his whole everything about writing as well. So check him out. And before we go, Bill, I actually I always like to end the podcast with a little game. Would you be interested in playing a little game?
All right.
Yeah, I call it my rapid fire round. So I kind of just give you really short questions, sort of open-ended, but also fun ones that are not quite traditional, like something that might make you think and let us know a little bit more about you as a person.
Okay.
Are you down?
I'm curious.
All right. So the first one. Are you an early bird writer or a night owl?
More of a night owl because I got my day job, so I mostly write in the evenings and weekends.
Okay. Yeah, that's really funny because a lot of people, we all have a preference, but sometimes it just comes down to when you're able to do it. If you can only have the mornings, that's what you got to do with. If you have the nights, that's what you do with. And I love that. Making the most out of it. I'm going to move along right to the next one then. What snacks power you through your writing?
In my writing, I'm actually toying with a novel. Everything I've written's been nonfiction, and I actually have some stories I want to tell that are true that I'll get in trouble if I tell them. So I'm adapting them and turning them into fiction, and I can tell these stories as fiction. So that's what I'm toying with right now.
Okay, so you're looking for more fictionalized writing, kind of like narrative
we'll
structure?
see. It's fun writing dialogue and having people interacting. It's different, and like I said before, I don't feel like I was a writer, and I certainly don't feel like I'm a writer of fiction, but I'm kind of approaching it as a hobby, and we'll see where it goes.
I love that. Do you have any ideas to share so far that you might have been dabbling with? I'm guessing you're thinking of some characters maybe and
well, it's basically about a new young family lawyer learning about family court and having some terrible cases and getting some consultation on how to deal with them and having setbacks and having things go forward and backward and all over the place. So it's drawing on my real life experience, and family court is a place most people don't know about. And when they get involved, like if they have a divorce dispute that ends up in court, because you don't have to go to court to get divorced, I think people will be interested. It's like my splitting book, only fiction. That's kind of what it is.
Bill, what's really funny is I actually had a client come to me once who she wanted to do a fictionalized business book. So, we created characters kind of modeled after herself and her friends, and the characters started off as just beginning small business. A business, this might encounter like hiring employees, like learning how to, check ROI, that sort of thing, all the way to the top until they became like, the top of the line, right? So it's actually really funny because I've actually written something similar to that. Well, not in the same realm as lawyers, but in terms of like business. Let me know if you're ever interested. I'd be more than happy to even give it like a beta read once you get the chapters written, or even editing work. I'd be more than happy to help you out with that, because I've kind of worked in that realm myself a little bit.
Well, that's good to know. Yeah, I haven't really talked. This is the first time I talked publicly about it. A handful of friends know I'm tinkering with this.
Yeah, it's an amazing idea. Like, a lot of people resonate with stories, right?
I think that's the key, is stories draw people in. And the reality is I got a lot of stories I can tell, but I can't tell the real story or I'll get in trouble.
People resonate more with stories. If they read a book and listen to a story, they're more likely to remember it and be interested and want to keep turning the pages. So I'm sure that's kind of the direction you're looking to take. But some of them you said were a little bit, you can't tell the true story. You have to change it up a little bit.
Have to fictionalize things. Yeah, because I don't want to humiliate anybody, and I also don't want to get sued for anything.
Of course, yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, I'm more than happy if whenever, just between you and I, if you ever want to, I'd be more than happy to kind of like help you do that, find ways to kind of tell a similar story while getting the same message across. I'm sure there's lots of opportunities for like humor within that too. I'm sure you've had so many funny things, and also ones that might be more like meaningful and thought-provoking too. So really cool idea. Something to think about.
Well, thanks. Yeah.
I'll reach out. Maybe we can talk about some stuff. I do admit the funniest thing about this conversation, though, is that it's actually not the question I asked you.
I know.
Did you? No, but like I asked you, actually, I said, what kind of snacks do you eat while writing? And you heard, what's next?
Oh my goodness.
That's funny, but I love your answer, because now I know a little bit about what's next for you, and that was going to be one of my questions.
Okay.
But hey, what kind of snacks do you eat while you're writing?
Well, I've graduated from Reese's peanut butter cups to carrots and nuts. So
okay. So are you saying that those of us who eat the Reese's aren't as good as your healthy vegetables?
Well, let's say that I ate a lifetime worth of Reese's, and now I've learned that I need to start backing off of some of that. So,
okay.
But I can just munch a few nuts, munch some carrot slices without having to commit to all the calories. So it's an alternative.
I get that. All right. I guess you've inspired me enough to go get the cucumbers and dip out of my fridge and stuff.
But occasionally I still get a Reese's. I slip them in there, just not as often.
All right. Well, I won't tell anybody. Don't worry. So yeah, I mean, hold on one second here. Let me make sure I have good connection to chop out at the end here. But yeah, I mean, again, if you ever do want to talk about that idea, you have my contact information. I'm an editor. Right. I'm a ghostwriter. I'm a beta reader. I kind of do it all, in addition to blog writing and YouTube videos and audiobooks. So I've worked with a lot of clients.
You do work with fiction? Is that?
I started with fiction. I did a lot of romance novels and a lot of fictional pieces. It's really weird. I've done so many projects, poetry, children's books, but fiction, yes, I have. And specifically, funny enough, exactly the kind of thing you're looking for. I'll send you a sample. It's a book about, she's a woman, she's just living her life, and I'm not going to tell too much because it's under NDA, being that I helped write it, but I'll let you know more about it in private.
Okay.
She goes through the steps to become a business owner, and through her journey, the reader is able to learn the tactics that my client wanted to share with the readership. So, I'm more than happy to share some tips about how to do that. It's kind of fun.
Interesting, because that's the part I don't know. And getting humor and romance kind of sprinkled throughout seems
without
like it would
distracting too much too, right? Because you don't want it to be just a
Right.
romance book. Yeah. So, no, I can definitely help you. Really, it's gonna be fun to collaborate. So we'll
That's
chat
good to
about
know.
it.
Okay.
Yeah. Well,
Another
and
good connection.
Exactly. And yet, back to our listeners, I mean, this is what it's all about. Once you get yourself out into the writer's world, you never know who you're going to meet. Even if I'm asking him about what kind of snacks he eats, and then he just tells me his ideas for the next book. But yeah, again, to all of our listeners, if you have an idea, get it out there. You never know where it's going to lead you. I mean, take Bill as an example. And Bill, is there any last thoughts you'd like to leave all of our listeners off with today in regards to the writing journey?
Well, the biggest thing, and I've been saying it throughout this, is just write what's important to you, write what you feel about what you're writing, because that often opens up a little bit more and you get a little more of your passion into what you're writing. So just keep at it, and eventually you'll have a book. And it's always a little shocking when you find out, wow, I've written all these pages, I've got a book here. So hang in there and try to give people something that they can use and that they want to know.
Hey, I mean, there you go. There you have it, everyone. Some really powerful insights from Bill yet again. So everybody, what we've heard today, if it reinforces something that you believe, Authors on Mission can help you, with experts like Bill too. When we share your ideas through books, you can create ripples of positive change that reach far beyond your immediate sphere of influence. If Bill never wrote his books, he would have never been able to touch the hearts and lives of so many people throughout the last 20 years. So, just think about that. And if this conversation has sparked ideas, you can reach out to Bill, you can reach out to myself, anybody at Authors on Mission too. And with that, keep on listening to our podcast, because we have authors on all the time who share their experiences as well. I'm Danielle Hutchinson. You've been listening to Authors on Mission podcast. And join us next time as we continue to help creators transform. Until then, keep writing, keep leading, and keep inspiring. Have a great day.